Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday evening of Folsom. I still say Folsom. I know there's other Brandon is here. So we are here for a leather BDSM kink and spirituality panel. Oh my gosh, what could leather and kink have anything to do with spirituality? Well, we're going to get into that in a little while, and we're going to run through quick because we got an hour. But first, hello, greetings. My name is John. I am a chaplain and sometimes seminarian. I work with Faithful and Fabulous, which is a program of the San Francisco Night Ministry. The Night Ministry is an affirming ministry that has been working with the queer community since the 1960s when we were founded, right out of the gate. And so we have renewed our commitment to witness and to make sure that we offer a space where people can do some healing from religious trauma and spiritual abuse that so many of us have gone through growing up in faith communities. So here we are. I'd like to introduce our panelists very briefly. To my immediate right is Race Bannon. Yes, some applause for not only does he have that tremendous bio of community leadership that you may have read leading up today, but he's also been sainted by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And I really consider Race a public intellectual. He's someone who speaks in a voice for community and people across communities to translate and help people understand the human experience. So thank you to Race for being here. And Troy over here, Mr. Man About Town, community activist, volunteer extraordinaire. I don't think that there is a nonprofit in San Francisco that you can get involved in and not bump into him. I never know what event I'm going to see him at. There have been events here in the Mission that I would have never expected to see him at, and there he is. Also a member at the MCC Church here in town. And so appreciate your presence to articulate your experience. And on our Zoom, we have Reverend Daniel. Reverend Daniel is ordained minister and chaplain and specialist in shame and grief. And we'll look forward to hearing from Daniel. And we also have Mixed Fix listening in, our special guest to offer perhaps during the course of the panel a alternative or additional insights from their experience, because we're a little heavy. We're a little heavy up here with the cisgender dudes that get a little bit, or mostly, I mean, I'm kind of in the middle space myself, but who sort of get most of the play around these weekends. So we want to make sure that we have some additional voice represented. So, Race, those people out there listening in or who might watch this recording later, who maybe they're coming in from, a church or a synagogue, or maybe they have a Buddhist meditation practice and they're really into spirituality, but they just don't understand why we're having a conversation about spirituality and BDSM or kink for leather. Could you give us just a little 101, like, what is this? What is it that we're talking about when we talk about leather and kink?
When we're talking about leather and kink, I'm looking at this audience and I have a feeling most of them know what I'm going to say. And I love the comment from the back earlier, just to point it out when you said, what is it? Leather and kink have to do with spirituality? And they're like, oh yeah, they immediately. For those that aren't familiar with leather and kink, leather is kind of an umbrella term that oversees a lot of activities and identities in communities centered around BDSM, fetish, and various kinds of kink. I'll put it that way. Much of it has some amount of power exchange involved. Some of it doesn't. It used to be that we defined it that way, but the truth is a lot of it happens without any power exchange whatsoever. Kink is kind of a term that has become more in favor, especially with younger people, to be a little bit more inclusive, since leather is often seen as kind of a subset of kink, whereas kink is seen as this broader set of activities and communities and things that we do erotically. we not only do these things erotically and sexually, but we also commune as people who share these things in common. So there is indeed a leather and kink community, as well as a type of identity, as well as a whole bunch of kinky stuff that we do.
Thank you. Ooh, I want to ask more questions to him, but we got some other folks too. So Troy, tell us a little bit about your background in the leather community and how you see it connecting to spirituality, or how it might even connect to your experience of a church or faith community.
Hi everybody. I have been here since '98, and in 2000, I was introduced to the Eagle on a Sunday afternoon with some friends.
Oh yes, the High Holy Day.
High Holy Day. I had gone through an experience
For some of us.
yeah, where I was in a coma for 2 months, and when I came out of it, one of the guys that worked in my clinic, we really became very close because he brought my mother to me when she was looking for me when she arrived in the city. So we had this bonding connection. So I went to these events and I got involved with Mama's family and into the leather community. It morphed around me. Sex is something that I love, and kink, part of it, it just makes it even more fabulous because you can just enjoy yourself, In spirituality, I've always been a spiritual individual. When I was younger, I was one that was 12 years old going running to the rosary group. I was Catholic. It was what it was, but I had that connection with God, and I know who I am as far as that's concerned, and pushing through my life and enjoying it as a leather kink individual. So, yeah.
Thank you. Race, we met for the first time at the 40th anniversary memorial for the AIDS quilt in the Grove here in Golden Gate Park, and we were reading names, and you saw my collar. You asked me some questions about who I was and what was going on with me, and I looked at you and you were fully dressed in leather, and I asked you, well, what's going on with you? And one of the things that you said is, well, I'm an atheist. So where does an atheist find a connection to spirituality in the realm of kink and leather?
Yeah, I am an atheist. I was raised in the Catholic tradition and came to atheism later in life. With that said, I have a full respect for the entire range of beliefs, and I believe everyone should believe or not believe as they see fit. I see kink and leather and the kinds of sexuality that we do as being transformative. I think it's cathartic. I think if you look to some ancient traditions around body stress practices, it would bring about ecstatic states to the body that would very often be interpreted by many as spiritual awakenings, spiritual openings. And so that is how I see it from a non-theistic standpoint, that I think that spirituality, in fact, if you go to the dictionary and you look up spirituality in the dictionary, it isn't just a theistic kind of view, God-centric view. Spirit can be many, many things. And I think that spirit is that which is very special and core to you, whatever that might be. And I think the leather and the kink experience allows us to open ourselves to that kind of experience. And I think often we have spiritual experiences and we don't name them with that label, spirituality, because we assign it to religion.
We assign it to religion, or sometimes spirituality gets assigned into things that are apart from the body, rather that include the body. In my tradition, of course, the whole idea of the incarnation, and the arrival and witness of Jesus is that it was, and he was fully human, fully divine, and there was a connection between those two things in that experience. And one of our primary rituals, communion, involves body, involves blood. These are resonant images that I can only imagine would also have resonances in metaphor in the kink BDSM leather community in so many ways. And the history of mortification, the history of self-flagellation in the monasteries. those monks are flagellating themselves all the time, depending on your order. I mean, depending on the spiritual practices of any one order. So, just about the time the Catholic Church decided that, oh, we're going to have Vatican II and we're going, modernize our orders. All of a sudden, what do you see happening? Things like Folsom Street Fair appearing in the world. It's as if there was a transfer of the energies and of the human experience that needed to be expressed. I'd like to invite Reverend Daniel into our conversation. Daniel, you are off to study in a Doctor of Ministry. Could you talk a little bit about the work that you plan to focus on and how you see kink and leather and spirituality connecting in your area of academic theological focus?
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I have a thing I want to say about what you were talking about, the mortification of flesh. However, to your first question, so I'm actually going to be embarking upon a Doctor of Ministry program at the ILIF School of Theology in Denver. It's a remote class. It's a hybrid type of thing, and I'm going to be looking at expanding upon the work I do around shame, and shame around sexuality and gender expression, as well as our desires. And actually, I just did a class last night for a group of folks in Las Vegas. It was a 101 education program called, and my class was No Shame in My Game, How to Become a More Authentic Kingster. And we talked about how shame can influence how we do our kink and how we deal with our desires, as far as how other people could tell us that we should be a certain way, as far as I should be a certain way as a daddy, or someone should be a certain way as a boy, or someone who's a dominant or a submissive. And and the thing is that the only person who can determine that is me or you. And that's one of the things that shame can hinder us, because we aren't able to be authentic in who we are. I know for me, as far as I can be a butch daddy and I can be that. However, I move pretty swishy through the world, and I'm okay with that because that's who I am. And because I've worked through my shame.
Squish too, right? No shame about the squish.
The squish. Oh no, it's like I actually I had a coffee date once where a few years ago where we met on Daddy Hunt, and we had a coffee date. And I came back from the bathroom. He's like, "You're a bit swishier than I expected." And I started laughing. And I said, "Yes, you're right." Because he's like, for a daddy shouldn't be swishy. That was what I heard him say. However, I've actually worked through a lot of my shame around my gender presentation and how I move through the world. And I was able to kind of acknowledge what he said and kind of own my own authenticness in my own, however I am moving through the world. So the work I want to do is looking at how shame impacts us in our desires regarding sexual desires, our kink and BDSM desires. I actually kind of, when I was writing my essays, I'm like, I'm outing myself as a kinky clergy person for all the world to see. And I have no shame in that, because I am a Metropolitan Community Church minister, and we embrace and fully hold on to our leather roots as well as our sexuality. And I think that is something that we need to see more of in the world, because religion has caused a lot of problems with regards to desires, not just around kink and BDSM, but just around sexual desires. And back to your point about when you mentioned the talking about the mortification of flesh, my first year in seminary in 2009, I wrote a paper called The Spirituality of Pain, where I looked at the historical record of how the mortification of flesh was used by monks and also other people in monasteries and of that nature to exercise the pleasures of the flesh, to commune with God. And actually what they were doing is they were inducing endorphins, and they were putting themselves into an altered state, which many people do today in the BDSM world in regards to, causing pain and inflicting pressures and things upon our body to put us into an altered state, to commune with the universe, to commune with God, to commune with each other. And that is the key thing right there, I think, that I talk about in my shame class, is about connection. that shame breaks that connection that we have with other people because we aren't able to be vulnerable and open ourselves up with those individuals that we connect with. And my paper, Spirituality of Shame, also talks about the group and MCC Los Angeles, the play People of Leather Among You, where they actually brought in conversations about leather and BDSM into the church setting to talk about that as part of their spiritual life. So this is something that is, in present day is very much, there is a place for kink and BDSM in that type of spiritual life. And I also agree with what Race had said, because there are so many different ways of looking at spirituality than from theological religion. There are so many different ways of looking at it.
Yes. I appreciate one of the things that you mentioned is that what we're doing today in having a panel on kink and leather and spirituality is not revolutionary. It's actually been done so many times before, but folks need to, maybe didn't hear about it. In the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, and before, the conversation has been happening. So this is our continuation and affirmation to anyone in the Zoom room or in this room that there is place and space for you to engage your spirituality and your sexuality, and it doesn't need to be divorced from each other.
You were very right in that.
Yes.
Being a Catholic, and when he sent me the information to put out into the world, I had a family death. So I've been dealing with that, and I didn't really get on putting that out at that moment on social media because it was uncomfortable. But of course, I put it out yesterday, this days later, but I needed to step into myself and let people know I'm real, sex is a part of life. We all got here from what? Sex. So it's a fantastic thing, and being connected with MCC and being at that church when I first went there and finding that spirituality has so many other aspects of life in connection with kink and sex and all of it. And it's just a joy to have a congregation or a place that looks at sex in a different light than being something that should be shamed. So I thank you, Daniel, for what you're doing, and I really hope everything goes beautifully for you.
One of the things I'd like to point out that Daniel said that I thought was really important, because I equate spirituality with connection all the time. And I think really good leather and kink and whatever we do to connect is a very spiritual thing. So I'm glad you kind of equated those two, at least in my head, that's what I heard. The other thing is that, and if people are a little bit squeamish about something graphic, I apologize, but one of the most spiritual things that I ever experienced, because you talked about mortification of the flesh, is people might have heard of the hooking ritual that, yeah.
I was just thinking about that when he was talking the entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference in the Southwest, and every year they would do this ceremony where they would have these professional piercers put hooks in people's chests or wherever, and a professional team of drummers would then drum for 5 hours nonstop, and 150 people of all genders, of all orientations, of all walks of the kink scene would dance and just be with each other. And at the end, by the way, I had never done that in my life. I sat down to do it just as an adventure. By the end of that 5 hours, which I did not stop moving for 5 hours, I was never higher in my life. That was honestly the highest I've ever been. But I never felt more connected to a room of 150 other people and myself and the kinky universe, if you will. So connection, absolutely. And that mortification of the flesh, hooking, or whatever we do, can bring that about.
Yeah, it definitely can. I had an experience, a friend in the leather community was releasing himself and finding himself in that moment and invited me to this event. So I go and there are hooks hanging, and then he's hooked in the back on both shoulders, or right in the shoulder blade area, and lifted off the ground. And his face told me everything. He was in his own space. He was with God, communing with God in that moment. it was beautiful and odd and fantastic all in the same breath. And I truly respect him for what he did. Honestly, I think it's absolutely fantastic when you can step into yourself that kind of way.
When you can step into yourself, I love that image. I heard some of that theme in what Daniel said around authenticity. One of the things that I think that kink and leather can offer the church is that if you are in a community that is considered deviant, is considered other, there really isn't anything other to do than you're forced into a fierce self-inventory, right? Because you have all these messages coming at you from the world about who you aren't or what you should be. And there is a, well, is that true? What am I or who am I actually? Is that right? What am I going to take of that and what am I going to shed? And talk about in our spiritual communities, practices of discernment, right? Discernment. How many churches or synagogues or sanghas maybe have not been engaging in those fierce inventories of who we are and what we believe? I think in the best of, and I know it's not always the best, there are problems in the kink and leather community too, right? Because we're human, right? And the kink leather community helps people understand in the context of the community what it is that helps them be human, right? So there are problems everywhere, but that is a gift, as well as boundaries. Ooh, how many worshiping communities don't understand boundaries? How many worshiping communities can't clearly state what boundaries are? And kink knows that. That is a gift that kink can give worshiping communities regardless of tradition. So I want to take a moment, if you are willing, Mixed Fix, I'm not sure because my phone isn't where I thought it was going to be to see if you messaged me, so apologies. I would like to welcome you into conversation. Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and how you see yourself in the context of this conversation on kink and spirituality?
Absolutely. My name is Mixed Fix, they, them pronouns. I am part of the community in the fact that been in the community for, around the community, I should say, most of my adult life, about 15 years, and only been fully engaged into it for the last almost 4 years now. And I'm also a seminarian and a pastor, so balancing two different worlds, and how I come and intersect in this space and conversation. I think very much like Daniel, for myself, it also includes radical transformation. My faith is radical, and in the same way, like, my queerness is radical. So because all these aspects of my life are pretty radical, I'm about seeing systems torn down, specifically morality. For my context, it's morality. Because I think, specifically from my faith traditions, the ones that I've practiced, we see that morality plays a big role onto what we dictate about what people can do, how they can do it. And not only for players, but even for our leaders, our clergy. What can someone from a pew participate in, and then what can clergy participate in? They're completely different, but we don't all stop being human beings. So just bringing all these questions.
Thank you for those questions, and thank you for being willing to jump into the panel, even though we're up here in San Francisco, you all the way down there in LA, and you made it work. Daniel, I see your hand.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad Mixed Fix is here to be able to bring another perspective as well. And I want to kind of touch on what Race had mentioned about the hook pull ritual at Southwest Leather. I have I think about 6 or 7 pins from Southwest. I've been to it actually a total of 10 times. I've actually done the hook pull numerous times. In 2015, when I did it, I was doing a job, or I was working at a alcohol and treatment program, and I was needing to, and I went and did the hook pull, and there was a cacique there who was a person who was kind of someone who went along in a journey where they didn't have hooks in them, but they were with you to witness what you were doing. And she started pushing my chest. She asked permission first. Consent is essential and consent is sexy. And you kind of talked about that within the kink community. That's consent is so important. She asked for my permission to push me, and she pushed me back against the hooks that were hook on strings. And I went somewhere. I don't know where I went. I just shot off, as Race was talking about, as high as, the highest there have been. I shot off somewhere, and I got this message that says, you are not doing the work that you're called to. I don't know where it came from. And I got back from the conference. I started looking for a job as a chaplain. And within a month and a half, I was doing the work that I'm doing today as a hospice chaplain. And for me, that didn't come from me. It came from some out there, my connection with the universe and connection with energy and connection with the energy, the essence of each other is something that really I find is so important with the kink and BDSM communities that I'm a part of and the people that I play with. If I don't have that connection, if there's not that energetic connection, I'm not going to really feel it to play. And that's one of the things I think with being able to recognize that. And one of the things I just want to say is, and Race actually turned me on to this book, I think it was Tell Me What You Want by Justin Niemiller. And I recommend this in my shame class because it's scientific proof that people desire power, exchange, and rough sex. It's amazing. It's not like it's an aberrant behavior. It's a common fact, and it's normal. And scientific proof in this book says that it's normal. Our kinky desires are normal, and that is something that is so revolutionary in my opinion. And I taught the class I taught last night. I told, get this book. If it's not in your library, get it, because it's so essential. It's also on Audible, so you can listen to it if you don't want to flip through the pages. Highly recommend it. And that to me helps me to recognize that these desires that I have, these aberrant, kinky, deviant desires that some people would label them, are common and normal.
Common, yes. Thank you. I appreciate hearing more about your vocational story and how a spiritual vocation that you have and that you act through in the world in care of others came to you directed through an experience, a kink experience. So that's a very powerful witness. Thank you for sharing that. This past Wednesday evening, through Faithful and Fabulous of the Night Ministry, I helped lead a leather Eucharist, a leather mass. And hopefully we'll get to do it again next year at the beginning or the outset of Folsom Week. And within the mass, we had a response to the gospel reading. We chose a piece of the crucifixion scene where Jesus was flogged. And for me, extremely important to recognize in that sort of fullness of humanity, the extent of what this divine being, per tradition, experienced along with us, right? Nothing of the human experience was foreign to this person that tradition teaches was divine. And during the right after the flogging, which I sort of saw as leather liturgical dance. I didn't really see it as a sex act per se. It was more a ritual flogging to represent the kink leather community's experience. And it was an act of devotion. The person who did the flogging when he finished said amen. And that one word of amen for me was the high point of the entire service. Not the homily, even though it was good, not the music, even though it was good. This one person's amen of devotion after having done a ritual kink practice was one of the most beautiful things I've experienced in the course of my vocational life.
Now, if you don't mind, I have
Please.
to interject. Yes, please. before all of this happened on Wednesday, which was really beautiful, and if you can come next year, and I'm hoping you were able to do it, please. It was a beautiful hour in a fantastic church right around the corner at the St. John of the Evangelist. Shout out to you. And the music was fabulous. The singer was dynamic. And I found myself standing in the middle of the church after struggling to rise, but bending over and getting smacked on the behind with a whip, basically, and a heart and a cross on the end of it.
Yes, the writing cross had a
Yeah,
cross
writing cross,
on it.
yes. It was an odd but beautiful experience because you stepping into yourself in that moment. I'm in a church. I mean, come on. It was already a lot to think about for most. When you say I'm going to church for a leather mass, what does that mean? And then we were talking and he asked for St. John's cross. St. Andrew's cross. Sorry, I'm getting the John St. Andrews confused. For that night. And I'm like, okay. Found one right away, but he had also found it, and it was quite a beautiful experience, honestly. I think it's something, just stepping into that church and seeing all the different leather people in leather and the kids with their gear on and in it was beautiful, truly. And you really pulled it together beautifully.
Reese, looked like you had something to add.
Well, I was at the leather mass, and a lot of my friends who know my atheism were like, whoa, you're going into a church. And of course, there were 1,000 jokes about I'm going to be struck by lightning and the church is going to catch fire and all these kinds of things. But I have to say that for someone who had not participated in a religious service in a very long time, it was rather special. It was rather lovely. And as somebody who comes from a non-God-centric worldview, I found it really a beautiful experience, amazing people. And one of the things that really was driven home was that one of the things that kink and leather and these fetish practices, et cetera, that we have in common with religious life and spiritual life is ritual.
Ritual, yes.
We do a lot of ritual.
Y'all do rituals so well. I mean, you can teach about rituals in the church and other faith communities too. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, we have and garb. We have our own garb. We have the way we dress to sort of identify, become this person, and sort of embrace who we are, which of course religious people do as well. So there's a lot of commonality.
You've seen the vestments that the priests wear. I mean, probably half the priests are only in seminary because at the end they get to wear a dress. I mean, that's a uniform. So yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. So I just wanted to sort of point out that parallel between religious practices, spiritual practices, and leather and kink, especially around the ritual and the symbology that we use, et cetera. Like, it really is very similar. So even if people are in the audience coming from a atheistic standpoint or agnostic, you can find a lot of commonality with the religious communities in that sense, especially, honestly, I went to the leather mass with a little bit of trepidation, I'm going to be honest. And I came out and I said, that was a really wonderful experience. I was not expecting that.
Well, thank you for coming anyway, even with your trepidation. I would like to ask Daniel or Sticks if you might have some words about the Eucharist. And anything that you might see as resonant with body, in the act of the Eucharist, something that you might see as connecting to the kink or BDSM community. One of the things that I know that I've enjoyed reading recently was Jesus as the ultimate submissive and God as the ultimate master or daddy. So from your theological or religious studies or practice, what might you riff on those themes?
I think that, at least for myself, that dynamic, at least it's the way that I consume it, the way that feeds my being, is Jesus being this ultimate submissive. And that's something that at the beginning of my own kink journey, I didn't get why I valued submissive so much. Like, it's almost like this narrative of how submissive can be inferior, but it was this notion in me that just like knew to value a submissive differently. And it was when I was able to then connect it to like, oh wait, it's because all my life I've essentially worshipped a submissive. It was someone that was so obedient in their commands that did a pretty intense scene, and now we all celebrate to this day that scene. That transformation that was able to happen because of that scene allowed us to have faith in a different way. And they're all just rituals. We're drinking wine, we're drinking a cracker, a saltine, whatever elements you want to make it into communion, that it's the ritual that we're honoring, and we're honoring a sacrifice. So for me, it's just beautiful.
I appreciate what you said about the story that we have inherited in the Christian tradition, at least, valuing this ultimate submission in which is found power. So in which is found, or some would say glory, right? So there is this revelation of power and this ultimate submissiveness. And then it helps understand that, oh, some of the sort of projections that submissives experience, don't be so quick with the judging, or how you value different people and where they might fit within the BDSM community. There could be more to the narrative there. Daniel, did you have anything to add?
To be honest with you, as far as the Eucharist is concerned, because of my pagan roots before going to seminary, I consider it more of a communal meal than a transubstantiation. I grew up Catholic as well, so for me, the whole transubstantiation, where it goes from being a simple elements of a wafer and juice or wine in most cases, to become the actual body and blood of Christ. For me, I don't follow that tradition. I have a hard time stepping across that. And for me, I consider it more of a common communal meal. And for someone who Troy knows, Reverend Jim Otulski, who was my mentor while I was in seminary, I talked to him about that. And he's like, that is something that, if it works for you, then go that route. So I'm other than what I just shared, I'm sorry, I don't have anything more. I don't have anything kinky. I don't have anything kinky to share about the Eucharist. So it can be. I mean, I'll give you an example of a different type of a thing. As far as at Southwest Leather, the Boot Black Party every year, they have someone is laid out with brownies on their naked body, and you get to eat the brownies off the naked body, and that to me is a very holy communion, because it's a shared meal and you're also connecting with that other person. So it is. I know some people who hold the sacrament of communion or the elements of communion very sacred. I'm not trying to blaspheme that. So, but that is another form of communion, as far as being able to because communion is actually, and I'm actually preaching on the intimate communion next Sunday at a church out in Pittsburgh, and because it's World Communion Day, and communion is also about our connection with each other. And that is something that really can make a big difference. And so for me, I'm going to be sharing about that, partnering with each other and communing with each other, because without having that connection and that communion, we can't be together as a community.
Oh, we can, it's just a little different. Just with MCC, we have a tradition of when you go to communion, you can go with others. And I've always loved that part of it, because friends, and we get to share that moment in this little group huddled around the Reverend, saying this blessing over you as they give you of the bread and or the wine. And I think that was the real great part for me, that connects you really well, especially with everyone else. And one thing I want to point out today, since we're moving a lot here, there's a lot of ladies here. Yeah. And I'm really, really happy to see that. And I think people don't realize that sexuality goes both ways sometimes. They try to put it on the men and call it our fault. But no, but I'm really happy to see all you ladies here today. Really, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Race, any thoughts before to extend any of these topics or themes before we open up questions to the audience?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat something I said during the Leather Mass
Great.
on Wednesday, and that is that for those that have been in the leather community, the kink community for any length of time, you have heard certain words bandied about: honor, tradition, integrity, brotherhood, sisterhood, otherhood. And when you look at what some religious traditions and spiritual traditions try to say, to do and be and embody, it's those things, which is also why I say they aren't leather values, they aren't kink values, they're human values. I think sometimes we try to co-opt them and call them leather values and kink values, but they're not, they're human values. And I try to hammer that home because I don't want to make us sound special, better than other people. But I do think that it's interesting that we glom onto those words and those ideas within the leather community, the kink community, and so do religious and spiritual practices as well.
I don't have a way to engage the people that are on the line or on Zoom, but if there were any comments or questions, especially from folks who may not be of the demographic primarily represented up here, would be very happy to receive them. Yes.
I'm just curious, sorry, knowing that like gender and sexuality and how it's defined.
So I'm just going to repeat a little bit of what you said so that folks online can hear. So the ways that we define gender and sexuality presently, there's some evolution, there's some relative newness to it.
Yeah, just having that like very binary view of sexuality. I'm just curious how you see that kind of
So how that sort of the current conceptions, binaries fit into this conversation, right? Because
knowing that gender and sexuality were a lot more fluid much earlier in the history.
More fluidity in the previous points of history. Thank you. And depending on culture, right? Some cultures very fluid, others probably also more binary, sort of depending on cultural location. Mixed Fix or Daniel, any thoughts to that question as far as construction of gender and sexuality and how it connects into kink and leather?
I'm not exactly sure. What I do know is that in my personal belief, I don't believe that, and mind you, this is my belief, I don't believe that Jesus self-identified as simply a man. There is a beautiful moment of transfiguration that we have in scripture where we know that Jesus at his baptism, yet another ritual, was transformed.
Right?
Yes, another ritual, another scene was transformed. And all we know about this transformation is that nothing about their being changed, only the way that people recognize them change. And to me, that's very much part of a trans experience where we've always been trans. For some of us, it's just later in life that we reconcile everything around gender and social constructs. But it doesn't mean that we haven't always been trans. So for me, that's part of scripture in there, but not, I don't know whether it actually answered their question. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Troy.
Well, for me, as you're saying, it's oh my goodness, I'm 56 years old and trying to learn all these new ways that people want to be represented is a lot. But stepping into that, it's about you and what you're feeling. So the wording may not feel like it's yours, but you know what you want from that feeling, and you should just represent yourself in that way and feel it and love yourself for what you're feeling. You know, the kink thing may not be the word that you may choose, but that also includes love, sex, caring, feeling, respect, all of it, all rolled into one ball. So feel that, and I think most people will be fine, but finding that definition of it is it's a thing. Maybe that's something we can all look into together and come up and create. Webster might need a new word.
One of the ways that I think I'm going to connect leather and kink, spirituality, and the discoveries we're making both individually and collectively around gender expression, identity, etc., is that leather and kink is about discovery. Boring people don't explore leather and kink. They don't. They apologies to anybody who's not kinky, but you need to be an exploratory person. You need to want a certain amount of discovery about yourself and about someone else to go down this path. And I think part of that discovery individually and collectively as a community, a set of communities, because I don't think of us as a leather kink community, I think of us as a bunch of intersecting communities around.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Is that part of that discovery is realizing that there are people who identify differently than we've been taught, that are different than we were taught, that decide to express themselves differently than we were taught, and experience life in a very, very different way other than this dyadic view that we've had for so many years. So I do think there's a direct correlation between leather and kink and discovery. And that's what so I don't think it's an accident that a lot of movements are happening all at once, leather kink being one of them, and discovering things around gender expression, etc. I think they're all related. So I'm gonna connect those dots.
Yes.
I was just wondering, you talked a lot about tradition and ritual, and I'm fairly new to both the worlds of religion and in Buddhism and other.
So I'm going to repeat a little bit of that. So we've talked a lot about ritual and tradition, and you're expressing newness both into the kink world and religious world.
Yes. And I've kind of always associated tradition with kind of sameness and the, like tradition, right? Like
Yeah, doesn't tradition mean same?
Yeah. And I wonder how you connect what you were just talking about of this discovery and this newness of new and old and really important identity additions to the kink and leather world. Like you're saying, there's not as much, there hasn't been historically as much space for female identified folks.
And so there hasn't been historically as much space for female identified folks. Yeah, how can tradition be new?
How does that connect?
Yeah.
How does that reconcile, or how does that very intentionally connect for you?
I can give my take on that. I consider traditions bridges that communities and individuals use to cross into a new set of awareness, I'll put it that way. So, for example, you will often hear in the leather community in particular, not the kink community so much, but the leather community, a lot about tradition. And unfortunately, there is this subset of people that believe those traditions are very set and solid. This is the way you do it. This
That
is the way
sounds like church to me.
It does, doesn't it?
God, it is.
We have our own set of fundamentalists.
Fundamentalist leather people. I was trying to get away from fundamentalism. I come over near the leather community, I'm going to find more fundamentalists.
There are, and there are people who want you to, you as a dom must be this way. You being into this activity must be this way. That's their view of tradition. I see tradition as ever evolving.
Yes.
And all through life, but certainly in leather and kink, and the traditions that were happening before are the bridges that make us discover the new ones because we need some platform to jump from. So that's how I see tradition.
We make the road by walking, it is said. And one of my favorite classes in seminary, as far as class titles at the very least, was living tradition. Tradition is something that human communities engage. And as those traditions are engaged, they continually evolve. It is a living, breathing thing. Once you have a tradition that does not change, that is when the tradition does not have life. That is when the tradition dies. Because if it stays the same, it is not appealing to the context and the culture in which it is in now. It is looking to the past, and it will probably die out. And so if indeed the leather community, the kink community is evolving and continuing to engage a living tradition, well, I tell you what, it has much to teach the church and other faith communities, because right now the churches and faith communities are dying. So that's another way that kink and leather can teach. Yeah,
they're stuck on the tradition. And the people that are trying to just uphold just their tradition, the tradition, and not expand their thought process on what could be if something was different. What could be if we did this or made this change. This is a little off the beaten, but my father founded a club in 1951, the Drug Social Club in New Orleans, with his friends, 7 of them. It is still in existence to today. He founded a parade in 1969 in New Orleans, Black organization called Nam Talk, 69 rolled, 70. And we celebrated last year the 50th anniversary of that. And my niece was the queen of that ball that day. So they've changed so much, so many different levels. And I've watched it because I've been through it and seen the evolution of it as it continues to grow. My father passed in 83. That organization is still running. Somebody picked it up and went with it. My cousin's family joined, and they just grew because they wanted to continue. And that's the same thing with the spiritual kink and leather communities. We have to continue. So we've got to continue to grow. We've got to experiment on things that are different and new. Some may fizz away, some may not. Some things may stick. Those things that stick, we can utilize them to help us to continue to grow, to bring more people in. You know, we've been having that challenge with MCC, with getting new people in. And there's like, what do we do differently? And lots of things we've tried and had to step back from.
I see Daniel raised a hand. It's almost 6, so this will need to be the closing word.
Thank you. I was wanted to comment about the question I heard about around gender. And one of the things I think that in kind of gender and tradition is, I think that heteronormativity and patriarchy are part of what the continuation of the difficulty within our community, within this community, within the leather and kink community, that perpetuates it. You know, around one of the things that even within the gay and lesbian and the LGBTQ community, there is pushback around kinky desires, and also about the fact that, well, is he this way or that way, or is she this way or that way, or are they this way or that way? And that is because of heteronormativity about the binary, that so many people can't get out of this, that you should be a certain way. It's like the person who should decide who you are is you, not your sister, not your brother, not your lover, not your parents, and not me. You know, I'm the person and that's part of being authentic. And it's a challenge for all of us. And I know, because we keep hearing these things from people, and there are things that I'm, as someone in one of my communities, I'm very much a stickler about being, you know, traditional about certain things, but I need to be willing to adapt. And that is something, because those who are willing to adapt are going to be discarded or die. And I think that we learned that from the ancestors of past, like the dinosaurs. And those are things, I think that's something that really, I think with the gender question for me is until we can get rid of heteronormativity and patriarchy, it's going to be a continued problem within all of our society.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. If you want to get a hold of our panelists after today, the event description has some ways that you can do that. A mixed fix. I promise to bring you back to another event for Faithful and Fabulous with the Night Ministry, so that people can get to know you more as well. You can look up the San Francisco Night Ministry at sfnightministry.org, and under programs, find Faithful and Fabulous to find out more that we're doing with and in the queer community for healing and well-being. Be well, have a safe weekend. May it also be sacred for you, if that's how you wish to term it.
Before we leave, I just want to publicly thank our panelists. Thank you so much, all 3 of you, all 5 of you. And I do just want to take a second in front of everyone and thank Tomas for running the Zoom and for somehow making it work. I don't know how you did that. And to our director of programming, Precious Green, thank you for doing registration tonight, bringing folks in, and for being such a leader in the space. And I believe Dylan and Lisa were at the front, so if you bought food or drink, you were served by, I think Dylan is, Salem. Salem's also up there. If you'd like to stay for the Kara Swisher talk, you can. We just ask that you exit and then come back in because we need to rearrange the room a little bit, okay? So Kara Swisher will be right after this. Thank you, everyone.
If I get a picture of everybody.
Yeah, of the audience, yes. I mean, is that all right with everyone?
Thank you for obtaining consent.
Try to wait, I want to do a panel real quick. Thank you all. Well, I'm getting slow down. Good, gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yes. All right, thanks, everyone.
As I get up, I'll get that.
Would it be true